Hi, Gary. Welcome to the Blood, Guts, and Paper Cuts podcast. This is the podcast where Sean O'Connor and Shannon Bushman sit down with some of horror's most creative people. We ask them to come on and to talk about their latest project, whether it be a book, a movie, a screenplay, their latest role, and we get into it. We let them talk about the experience, what it means to them, how it came to be, and how everybody could get their little peepers on it. What we've also asked them to do is suggest the perfect watch-along, because you know we love movies here at Blood, Guts, and Paper Cuts. So they suggest a watch-along that goes along perfectly with it. We unpack that and we get into it. It could be good, it could be bad. We're going to find out in real time, just like you. So sit back, enjoy yourselves. This is the Blood, Guts, and Paper Cuts podcast. Hey everyone, Sean here from the Blood, Guts, and Paper Cuts podcast and MacabreDaily.com, and I am thrilled to introduce this week's episode. We had none other than Joe Lansdale, American master writer himself, sit with us. Joe was everything you want him to be. You know, that adage, don't meet your heroes, certainly didn't apply here. Joe was funny and warm and insightful and engaging, and we just had the best time with him. I know you're going to enjoy this episode. I'd reached out to Joe a couple of months ago, and I asked him if he'd want to come on the podcast, and he was gracious enough to accept my offer. And we kind of circled around what we were going to talk about, but Joe has this incredible new collection of Lovecraft-inspired short stories called In the Mad Mountains. So we landed on how there hasn't been a definitive H.P. Lovecraft movie yet. There's been a few, but none have truly captured Lovecraft or completely landed for the Lovecraft fan out there. We get into how he is a problematic figure, that we honestly, none of us really do enjoy his writing, which is pretty great. We get into it right away, and how Joe's interpretation of Lovecraft is so satisfying. It's so rich and character driven and atmospheric. But, where do I start with a man like Joe Lansdale? He's written classics in damn near every genre. Western, horror, mystery, suspense, sci-fi. He has written comic books and screenplays that everyone knows and just absolutely adores. He's the winner of the British Fantasy Award and the American Horror Award and the Edgar Award, and 11-time, I'm going to repeat that, 11-time winner of the Bram Stoker Award. There's nothing this man can't do, because he is an accomplished master at words and writing. It's unbelievable. And he's such a humble and nice guy. I don't know what I was expecting, but it was kind of exactly what I thought would happen. He just turned out to be dynamite, and you're really, really going to enjoy this. Joe's written some of the best novels and short stories and novellas out there. I mean, just off the top of my head, my favorite of all time, and a damn good movie, Bubba Hotep. The Hap and Leonard series, which was phenomenal. That adaptation TV series, but the books are just insanely good. The Night Runners, The Drive-In, Cold in July, The Thicket, The Bottoms. The hits just keep on coming. So sit back, put up with myself and Matt, but truly enjoy what Joe Lansdale has in store for you over the next hour. Can't thank you enough, Joe, for coming on. We're dying to get you back. But for right now, I'm just going to be real happy with what we got. Everybody, Mr. Joe Lansdale. Hey everyone, Sean O'Connor here from Sinful Cuts and Macabre Daily, and I have got Matt Orozco, editor-in-chief and owner of Macabre Daily, with me, and we have got the absolute pleasure of having living legend himself, Joe Lansdale, with us today. Joe, I reached out to you a couple of months ago, and I said, look, if you'll come on the show to make me the happiest man in the world, what would you like to talk about? And you immediately got back to me with, I'd love to talk about how there's never been a good H.P. Lovecraft adaptation. And all of a sudden I was like, is it my birthday? This is the best thing I've ever heard. So I know we're leaning into it because of this gem right here. We've got Joe's collection, Lovecraft-inspired collection in the Mad Mountains. By the way, shout out to Mike Mignola, by the way, for this incredible cover.
Wonderful.
Absolutely beautiful. So I read the book cover to cover. I was just absolutely blown away by the stories. There are so many inspirations there. I mean, you've got your Poe, and you've got your Twain, and your Arthur Conan Doyle, and even your Chandler. So I have to start out, before we get into why there are no good film adaptations of Lovecraft, I've got to start from the beginning. Joe, what was it that just brought you into the world of cosmic dread with Lovecraft?
Well, this is going to sound peculiar, but I don't really like the way he writes.
Full disclosure, neither do I.
Really, I came in kind of, I think I'd read a couple of stories when I was a kid in anthologies, but I came in through Robert Bloch. Robert Bloch wrote some Lovecraftian stories, and I liked those really well, and I liked some of the pastiches, and then I found the real thing. And there's certainly things I don't like about Lovecraft's style of writing. And I think it's weird. Nobody has a job. Rarely are there any women. And if they are, they're peripheral, or they're being bred.
Yeah. Or they're bad.
By monsters, which that was all interesting too, and appealing in a scary, unsettling way. But I always thought that what drew me to Lovecraft was he had some individual short stories that I really liked, Pickman's Models and Cool Air and so on. I like those a lot. But also the thing that really pulled me into it, I think, was this whole idea of the old ones, this thing behind the veil, and the fact that really when you look at it, it's science fiction with a horror attitude, because he's not really dealing with the supernatural in those. He's dealing with something that's real, but doesn't seem real to our collective thoughts on this side of the dimensional barrier, And I always thought that was fantastic. So I think that's what drew me. Now, and I had, of course, I think I've read most of Lovecraft. I certainly can't say I've read them all. So I have to admit that I'm drawn to those things, even though I wince at some of the eldritch trees or bushes or whatever it was. I might be exaggerating. I don't remember exactly. But a lot of that did not appeal to me. And I think when I reread a lot of them when I was older, I felt like their constructions were often just sort of rambling, and then, the guy gets eaten in the end, or something happens to him. But there were just concepts there, like the music of Eric Zahn. I was also always been fascinated with the idea of Robert Johnson selling his soul to the devil, and I've kind of combined those in Bleeding Shadow, because I kind of made it more dimensional threat instead of the supernatural threat, like Eric Zahn, the music of Eric Zahn, in this case, it was a blues guitarist. And so that's a definite, connection there. And in the Mad Mountains, for example, is really my closest pure tribute to Lovecraft, although it's written in a different style. I felt like I really touched on a lot of those things that Lovecraft wrote that appealed to me in those stories. So that's kind of I guess in a nutshell. I would say that I found him first in the 60s when I was a kid, and then really started exploring Lovecraftian literature in the 70s. And as I said, first through Robert Bloch and other acolytes, and I knew Bob Bloch a little too. And I talked to him about Lovecraft, and we were, I would say that we weren't like dear friends, but we were friends, and we talked on the phone now and again, and we exchanged correspondence. Usually it was postcards back then, and he would write all this stuff on one little postcard. And I also would see him at conventions and things of that nature, like a horror convention or world fantasy convention or what have you. And we would always get together and sit and talk. And I thought a lot of Robert Bloch because I was a big fan of his, really not so much his Lovecraftian stuff in the long run, but some of his early Lovecraft stuff is what led me into finding out more about it. And he wrote some really good Lovecraft stories, but I think it was more his suspense and, his novel Psycho and all of his short stories, which are just fascinating and amazing, like the Hellbound Train, which my brother and I adapted to IDW. And early on, Rick Claw and I did a big comic illustrated anthology from which we bought the Hellbound Train that was adapted at that time by someone else. And it's nice to see those contrasts and to see how powerful his stories are. But without Lovecraft, there might not be any Robert Bloch.
Yeah, I guess that's a great point. That is a great point, how it just, one leads to the other and then they have their interpretation. You have your interpretation of it as well.
Yes.
This is you got to forgive me. This is going to sound syrupy. It's always embarrassing when you have the person in front of you and then you're going to lay it on thick. But this is why I love Joe Lansdale being inspired by H.P. Lovecraft. I love these stories because I read you. I got into you. Sorry, a quick aside. I got into you sitting back against the bookshelf in a Barnes & Noble all the way back. Jesus, this would be the 80s. And I'm reading Godzilla's 12-step program. And I'm saying, who the hell is this author? And then that led me to, the Night Runner and the Drive-In. And that's how I discovered you. But I enjoy your work because your characters, they leap off the page. I enjoy Lovecraft's work because I like existential cosmic dread. Mm-hmm. But the characters, they're so flat. They're just so one-dimensional. I like the themes of Lovecraft, but you take your characters that damn near throttle you when you open the book cover, and to have that cross-section of that existential dread, but the human aspect of your characters it's just like catnip for me. I cannot say enough about this damn collection. It is fantastic. And then for you to sprinkle in these other inspirations, like I said, of Twain and Poe, and it's just like your eyes start to roll back in your head. It's just fantastic. So my next question for you in regard to the collection is, first off, how did you decide to pull these inspirations in, like Twain and like Poe, Algernon Blackwood? How did you decide to do that? And then how did you choose which ones you were going to do?
I don't think I consciously did it, except with the Dread Island. I guess you could say also the Poe piece. I was asked to write a story that had to do with, the Auguste Dupin, the detective in the Poe stories, where he kind of created detective fiction. And I was also knew that he influenced the Sherlock Holmes stories by Doyle. So I tried to kind of push the envelope a little bit and use Dupin and yet write something that was kind of like Holmes too. So I kind of made my cake and ate it too, So to me, that was good. Twain has always been like, and Poe was a favorite writer of mine as a child because it was given to me very early. I could read very early. And my mom gave those to me, and people would say, well, your mom gave you Poe when you were 8 or 9 years old. And I went, yeah, she did, And so that was it. But Twain is a favorite writer of mine. I love Twain. I think that was just a natural outgrowth, because what they wanted to do was just to take classic writers and do this kind of new take. They did stories like by, Jane Austen and different people. And mine was one of a group of stories that I wrote. And I decided I wanted to use Huck Finn and Jim. And I also threw in things like Uncle Remus, which I read when I was a child and was read to me. And I also threw in Lovecraft, obviously. And so all those things came together, and like little obsessions like Amelia Earhart, I've always been fascinated with that story. And there are other things in it too, as well. But I think it was just happened because I was asked, but I would have done it anyway. I think it's very likely I would have written those stories because those are among my favorite authors, and they wrote some of my all-time favorite stories. So it was easy for me to want to do that. And I did the best I could to kind of ring the bells of those stories. And in the Poe case, to also look at who he influenced, like Doyle, and try to hit some place that kind of captured both of those things and yet was a Lovecraft story.
Well, I think what I love most about your writing and you as an author, and I'll give credit to Neil McRobert. You did a fantastic episode of Talking Scared with him a while back, and you had said that you write for yourself.
Yeah.
You know, you write for yourself, and that comes through with each and every single story, each and every single novel, because you have this fearlessness, and you just go there. You know, I mean, one of my favorite things that I own is this copy of Bubba Hotep right here. Now, it's signed by you, but I mean, we're talking about you know, a story about Elvis in a convalescent home. That then a mummy gets introduced to the mix, and shenanigans ensue, and it's like you have to write for yourself if you're doing something like that. Yeah, everything works, and it's so satisfying. Your sense of fun is definitely something that I don't necessarily know that H.P. Lovecraft maybe experienced with his writing, but your sense of fun just leaps off the page. So
it is fun. It is fun. I mean, I became a writer because I loved stories. I didn't want to be a slave to other people. I mean, I worked in aluminum chair factories, mobile home factories. I was a janitor for years. I was a bouncer sometimes. I did everything like that. And believe me, writing's more fun. And so I appreciated the fact that I could, not end up working in a factory or foundry. And for those people who do that, bless you. You know, you may even love doing it. Though I've never really talked to many people said, I can't wait to go to the foundry. I'm sure there are exceptions. You know, if you own the foundry, right. You might be. But it's just those things were what I thought could be my fate. Growing up in East Texas and Gladewater, and then Mount Enterprise, then back to Gladewater, which, they're not very far apart. So I wasn't like I was traveling very far, nor was it like I was going to Harvard or anything. and so I would enjoy reading. Eagle Rice Burroughs was a big part. London, Twain, Kipling, all the classic writers originally, as Robert Louis Stevenson, and then later on Flannery and O'Connor and Hemingway and Fitzgerald and John Steinbeck and, Carson McCullers. All of these people influenced me just as much as the genre writers that I admire and love, but I've always liked the way stories are driven with genre fiction like an engine. It's not just all mood and talk, although I enjoy those a lot and I'm influenced heavily by them. But I just knew that I wanted to write. I knew that's what made me happy. And I knew if I got into that situation where I was writing for other people, and it's not that I don't care about other people. I want them to like my work and hope they do, but I don't have that ability to know what other people like. You put 30 people in a room, I'm going, are these people all the same? Or do they all like the same thing? Maybe the majority of them do, which is why they have bestsellers, but I just couldn't do that. I didn't want to do that. And I found that I make a good living, I sell well, but I sell differently than those writers, and I sell in a long term. And I also manage there have been adaptations to film and comics, lots of film options that didn't get made. So I've always had a steady income between books and short stories. And I love short stories more than anything, and film and comics. And I wrote screenplays and, essays. I like doing all of it. If it interests me, I'll do it, and I did some, pseudonymous work to buy a car and things like that back when I was starting out. My wife and I needed a car. So I did 3 MIA Hunter books back to back pretty much. And,
I didn't know that.
Yeah. I did 3 of that series. And so, I love to write, but I don't want to write like things like the MIA Hunter. I mean, I really did get up in the morning and would nearly throw up in the toilet every morning. Not because I thought it was a bad thing to do, but because I didn't love it. I didn't have that interest. So I tried to incorporate some of my own interests into those books. And that's true. And they're the most collectible, by the way, so those 3. So I like to think that I made some impact in that series, but it's about joy. That's what it's about. It's about joy, and it's about bringing all of your interests, not just one interest. But if I had to write a bestseller type novel with the same character every year, it's just not for me. I'm not saying it's not for other people, but it's not for me. It's a profession, but it's more than a profession for me. And I've always said I write like everybody I know is dead.
Yes.
I write for other people. I write for me, but then I hope like hell people like it, of course. So I'm not dissing the reader. I'm just saying, honestly, I don't know what you want. I know what
You're saying, hey, this is what I've done. This is for me, but
right.
Doors open, come along for the ride.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. We have to talk about, I just need to bring it up because it's on video demand right now, The Thicket.
Yep.
That adaptation, holy cow, what a phenomenal film. Unbelievable, Joe. So, kudos. They did a bang up job with that. So you can see The Thicket on demand right now. And I'm telling everyone listening to this, please go and watch that movie. Adapted from Joe's novel. Novel's incredible. The movie is fantastic. The acting is unbelievable. The cinematography is crazy.
Beautiful.
So I know that you were all in Canada not that long ago for the premiere, right?
Calgary. Well, no, the premiere was actually what I did is George Martin has a theater in Santa Fe. So I convinced them to get him to show it at his theater. The Jean Cocteau Theater. And so I went there first because George is a friend. We've known each other for years. So I went there to visit with him, but also to see, really that was the first, I think, theatrical release. And it was done for one night, and it was done, I guess you called a sneak. And so we went to that and saw it there first, but then the premiere was in Los Angeles, and that's where the stars were and all that. And then in Calgary, they showed it later because that's where it was filmed, in that area, so.
I saw the pictures online. It looked like a blast. It looked like you're all having a lot of fun. So that's great.
We were, yeah.
All right. I suppose we should get into it. I mean,
Sorry, let me say this. The movie is good, but you know what's better? The book.
What?
It's better.
Of course. Of course the book is better. And you can find a link in the show notes, which I'll put in, to buy that very book. So don't you worry, Joe, we've got you covered. All right, fellas, I think I don't know if this is going to be a depressing conversation or not, but we've got to get to it. Why the heck hasn't there been a phenomenal H.P. Lovecraft movie? And Matt, I'm gonna draw you in now. We're gonna start with you. Why do you think it is about Lovecraft that is just like this insurmountable wall?
I mean, I think you've all hit on a couple of things that might explain it. One, when we talk about Joe's writing filled with joy, and that's kind of the driving force of it all. I don't think H.P. Lovecraft was a joyful person.
Don't think so.
And I think that shows in his writing. I think he's never, even horror writers have good things happen in their stories, but there's no good fortune that seems to befall anyone in Lovecraft stories. It's all just kind of a domino effect of bad things. So I think that's part of it, is that he doesn't create an environment that's easy to visualize outside of his page. And, it's also his prose. It's not, it's almost like stereo instructions meets someone's diary. It's not very helpful, but there's times when it's almost like he's a landscape painter, in that he does these amazing descriptions of the world around something. So like the Dunwich Horror is one of my favorite short stories of his.
Me too.
And it's because he does such a good job describing this place, like this part of Northeast Massachusetts area that's just rotten, right? And all the things that are rotten about it, the shed that he keeps going to do his experiments in. So I think but the thing about it is there's no characters to really follow. So when you look at the Dunwich Horror movie adaptation, they try and take the lead character and make him kind of like a dashing man. But in the story, he's not at all that way. He's a disgusting, almost like creature of sorts. So I think Lovecraft never gives anyone an opportunity to adapt his work because he's creating something that has always been very much Lovecraft's, just, divulging whatever's going on. And I was curious to know, Joe, you mentioned that he didn't you didn't find his writing all that appealing, but I'm wondering, you have access to the authorship kind of world. Do other authors, your peers, also view his writing the same way? Is the kind of almost repelling in some ways, or not engaging?
I can't speak for everybody, but a whole lot of writers I've talked to, especially as they've grown older and gone back to reading, find that to be true, that he's, kind of a strange stylist that's hard to read.
Right.
But a lot of people I know just absolutely love him and are fascinated and love his style. So, I'm speaking for me,
right,
and a handful of people I know that I've talked to about it that are authors, and some of them who have written Lovecraftian works. The problem is that Lovecraft is all mood, and mood is hard to put on film.
Right.
I want to make one proviso, though. I said there hasn't been a good Lovecraft movie, but there is one that's a short feature, Call of Cthulhu, which is a silent film, which is done as an old style silent film. That one's actually pretty damn good. It captures it. So I'll kind of revise what I said in that I think that that's as close as you've gotten to a Lovecraftian film. The Dunwich Horror movie, I liked it okay, but it was it was really more like a devil worship.
Right. Yeah. It wasn't what Lovecraft was going for at all. And
he was going for at all. And I did an adaptation of that story for I think it was IDW some years ago. And I remember adding some characters in and do it. It was, and I was asked not to do a literal revision, which would have been hard to do. Because really, when I reread the story, which was one of those like you, I really liked. But when I reread it, I thought, this doesn't really make much sense. That's here and it's over there. And I hadn't noticed that before. But when you're adapting something, you're thinking differently. And I don't think all stories have to literally make sense. They just have to be effective. And I think it was very effective for me when I first read it. But when I reread it, I felt a little less so. I couldn't quite figure out in some cases what really was going on, what the through line was, but it has, and you said this too, it has terrific imagery. When he had imagery, he was at his best. He was mood and imagery. That was it.
Yeah.
There were no characters, dialogue sucked. There were no women. There were nobody that had jobs. Everybody, was somehow, I guess, living off inheritance, a meager.
Rich professors.
Yeah, exactly.
So
it's an oxymoron almost.
Yeah, but I do think Call of Cthulhu is good. So I wanted to not exactly take it back because it's not a full-length movie. It's short. And there have been some short pieces based on Lovecraft stuff that are pretty good. But films, no, with that one exception if you call it a film, because 45 minutes isn't normally considered a feature.
I think the silent nature of it leans heavily toward the success of that film because it really is all mood and atmosphere.
You're right. You're right. And the black and white aspect of it works really well. And a lot of the adaptations of his works, a lot of color and a lot of like swirly lights and stuff like that. And that never really works for me. I guess the Reanimator is fun. I liked it. I guess I could have to add it too, but it's not much like the story.
No.
Same with like From Beyond. From Beyond's a great film, but it does stay somewhat close to the storyline, but it's very different. Yeah, the general storyline. But the only one I could ever think of that I thought really nailed it was Dagon. The only problem that Dagon had. So Dagon was pretty good, but the problem it had is that it just happened to come out around the time when everyone was experimenting with CGI. And so the effects have not aged very well, but the story is probably as close as you're going to get to, people worshiping the lake gods, and what comes from that. So I think he does, I think he's hard to adapt because it doesn't give you a lot to adapt. So that's why you get so much filling in of the blanks, kind of like you said, Joe. There's this, you need to give characters something to care about, or they can't just.
Or you care about them, and even if you hate them, like James Cain, who wrote Double Indemnity and Postman Rings Twice and Mildred Pierce, even his characters, many of them, especially in Postman and Indemnity, they're terrible people. But you're fascinated with them, and you almost feel like, I hope they get away with this. You know,
Yeah,
now,
very
that's
much
writing.
so.
That's character. I mean, when you're in your more sober moment, you go, well, of course I don't want that to happen. But there's something appealing about those characters, or at least you feel sorry for them in some degree, you know. But Lovecraft wasn't like that. They were mainly just like they were stand-ins for ideas. That's really it. You know, it's always a stand-in. But things like the music of Eric Zahn, which I always like, just the idea of this guy having to play music to keep this, you know, thing back that's beyond the veil, so to speak, that appealed to me enough, and that's why it influenced Bleeding Shadow, you know.
I love that the Bleeding Shadow starts the collection, by the way. It's just the perfect note to start that collection off. So good. So good. Matt, Joe, I think you've touched on something. You know, you basically, even though there's been no truly successful adaptation, a lot of these directors, they take the notion, they take, you know, one part of Lovecraft and then they add their own mix to it. You know, like Stuart Gordon with The Reanimator and From Beyond, and he did Dagon as well.
Yeah, he did. I mean, he was like, I'd say he's the patron saint of H.P. Lovecraft adaptations.
Yeah, we used to talk on the phone now and then. I never really knew Stuart, but I think at one point he was interested in maybe doing something of mine, but it never really gelled. And I don't even remember what it was about. And we talked about Lovecraft a couple of times. I think it had to do with the fact that he felt Lovecraft was in the public domain and others did not. I believe that was the bulk of our conversation. Why we were talking about it, I don't honestly remember. Maybe it was in relationship to something of mine that he was interested in.
Well, I mean, I think it's also his writing. Lovecraft's writing has a lot to do with his, like, the work he was doing for it, right? He did a lot of pulp novels and, you know, kind of, you know, Bailey journalism work, you know, just short stories here and there. So I think that's why you get these kind of really great little images. But as far as characters you care about, you know, there are some consistent characters. I think one that shows up a few times is the detective. I forget his name, but he's in the Curious Case of Charles Ward. I think he's the detective in that one. Yeah, but you know, it's just they're not memorable characters. It's not like a Sherlock Holmes or anything like that that you're attributing to Lovecraft.
Yeah. Well, you know, he did work for Houdini. You know, he wrote a story supposedly with Houdini, but I'm sure that he wrote it. And there was a lady, I cannot remember what her name was, that he collaborated with, but I think he mostly wrote it. And it was something in a mound. I can't think of what the story was right now. And but in fact, it's one of my favorite stories by him now that I think about it, and I can't even remember the name and all of the story or the lady that supposedly he collaborated with, because I probably read it in the 1970s, you know. But you know, there were moments, but none of them to do with character.
Yeah, exactly. I will say one of my favorite adaptations, I do love The Haunted Palace, the Roger Corman film.
Yeah.
Because it's got Vincent Price. So you kind of have me right there.
Did Corman direct that or just produce it? Or did he produce it?
I believe he directed.
Yeah.
I believe he did.
Yeah.
And, you know, you've got those ornate sets. And you've got, you know, it's at that perfect moment. I think it's 63. Oh, and Corman did direct it, but it's just that perfect moment where, you know, Corman he's cruising through his Poe and he makes a little detour toward Lovecraft, but it's got all of those elements that made those fantastic Poe adaptations, like The Pit and the Pendulum, all of the House of Usher. It's all right there on the screen with the colors, the saturated colors, and it does work. And as far as a nihilistic ending, it comes pretty close to what Lovecraft has in mind, because, you know, spoilers for a movie that's just decades old, you know, Price at the end of that movie, he's the bad guy. They think that they vanquished the foe and they've saved the day, but he turns to our hero and he's just like, I'll never stop thanking you enough. And, you know, the only thing he doesn't do is twist his mustache, and that is fantastic. I really do.
I love those, especially when I was a kid. You know, and writers like Richard Matheson and Charles Beaumont worked on those, and they worked for the Twilight Zone, of course. And Richard Matheson is one of my favorite writers, and Beaumont is even more so to some degree. They were great writers. They wrote a lot of great short stories. And of course, you know, Matheson wrote I Am Legend.
Yeah.
Beaumont wrote one novel, I think it's called The Intruder, and it was made into a film called that, and then later called I Hate Your Guts with Shatner, with William Shatner, and Beaumont appears in it. My old friend William F. Nolan appears in it, who died a few years back. He wrote Logan's Run with George Johnson, and it's interesting to also say this, though I don't think there have been many great Lovecraft movies. There have been a lot of good movies that were influenced by Lovecraft, and some TV shows. I like True Detective is certainly Robert Chambers, The King in Yellow, but it's very Lovecraftian. It's got that, it never quite gets over there, which what makes it worse, what makes it powerful, because you just have this unsettling feeling when you get through that, there's something beyond the veil that does not like you. And it's sort of like King's novel Revival. That's a Lovecraftian pastiche of I think of really some importance. I don't think the novel did that well, and it certainly has a bleak ending. But I think that's one of his better works, and it's Lovecraftian in influence. And Jerusalem's Lot, a short story he wrote for Night Shift, was very much a Lovecraftian story. When Salem's Lot switched, when they novelized that concept of that town, it switched more to Bram Stoker and Peyton Place. But I really liked Jerusalem Lot, the short story, which is told like a lot of Lovecraft stories in like letter or journal form.
Well, Joe, you mentioned something that I think is like there haven't been a lot of adaptations in film that might have worked, but I think on other mediums like comics and graphic novels, there have been, because you're able to take you're able to put pictures to the mood that is being illustrated. And so like when you have like, an eldritch horror that you can actually describe that isn't just, unnameable, right? There's a literal, the silliest short story that H.P. Lovecraft wrote is The Unnameable, because it's literally about something that he won't describe, and it kills two people to tell him the story. And it's like, well, how am I supposed to be scared of something I don't know? I can't even think about, visualize.
It's right. There's not a lot of Algernon Blackwood adaptations. Now, he wrote characters. He wrote well. He wrote far better than Lovecraft. In fact, was doing the same thing. And I think people forget that he and Arthur Machen had already sort of invented what he became famous for. And I think part of the reason he became famous is that Lovecraft's prose is a 12-year-old boy's idea of a great writer. And because it's written all over the place. It's like a 12-year-old boy's idea of a great actor is someone who really, is chewing the scenery and stuff. And I say boy because mostly they were male that I knew who really loved Lovecraft growing up. There now that's broadened, but when I was growing up, that wasn't the case, And so you're right. There have been some very nice, and like I said, I've done a couple. Whether they're good or not, that's up to other people to decide. But I think it works real well for Lovecraft in comics and stuff. And some of the short things that have been done in anthology films and things like that, I think work pretty well. And the things that are, kind of Lovecraftian, even the Poe adaptations that and you were talking about this before, that Corman did often had a lot of Lovecraft in them,
Yeah. Yeah, it's Lovecraft. It's kind of like a cycle. It goes away, it comes back. It's popping up a little bit now. I mean, we had Suitable Flesh came out last year. We had The Color Out of Space came out, the Nicolas Cage movie, and I mean that was just saturated in all of the colors that lean into Lovecraft. I mean those pinks and purples. I mean. It literally is the entire film, but it's, every now and then you get it pops up. There's a new film that came out called The Substance, which people are talking about,
I've seen things about it.
And it's The Substance is like a bright glowing green, injectable, which is very much like what you have in the Reanimator. So they're making, they're taking the red yarn out and they're putting the conspiracy theory together.
Is it somebody else? Was it Demi Moore?
Demi Moore. Yeah.
That was Demi Moore. Yeah.
Right.
But, I heard someone make a comment on The Substance that I thought was interesting, and kind of relating it back to Lovecraft as somewhat, is that, the gore in The Substance is very surgical. It's very clean. It's not like kind of overflowing and kind of gross and bubbling. Whereas like when you see a lot of Lovecraft, it usually has that kind of almost grotesque look to it, as opposed to this, almost, I want to say beautiful gore sounds like an oxymoron, but in the substance, it's like, the back splits open. There's not like a pool of blood. It's like it just kind of nicely cuts open. So I think that one thing that makes Lovecraft kind of consistently interesting is that he does have this opportunity to play with the gross.
Yes.
And, especially the descriptions of some of it, because he always gets knocked for not having the best descriptions, but I think that's not entirely fair. He doesn't do character well. And he doesn't do like the big elder god stuff. That's where he starts to lose the plot a little bit. But when he's focusing on scenery and situation and creature, he always does a good job of describing how gross something is or how grotesque something should be.
Yeah. I think for Lovecraft too, just the human body was gross. I think that he felt uncomfortable with that. So, when he got married, he didn't stay married long because it involved sex.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was our first incel, I think. Maybe our first documented incel, perhaps.
Well, when he was always he's noted for being racist, but he married a Jewish lady, and I always think that too, that people, if they had lived in that time, would have found that a lot of people shared his views. That doesn't make them right by any means, but it doesn't make him unique. It just makes him very much of his time. And I never got the feeling that he was out to hurt people or whatever. And that, again, that doesn't excuse those thoughts or those ideas. But I think people are more complex sometimes than we realize, And he's not celebrated for his racism. He's celebrated for his fiction and the things he created, And even with all of the provisos, I've written an entire book of stories that have to do with his influence, and I've got others here and there that I didn't use that weren't among my favorites. But his impact is immeasurable, and I see some people in the horror field they want to just get rid of him, because of some of his background ideas. And what they got to realize is that probably 50% of the horror field comes from him, if not more. Yeah. Because that's where a lot of people got interested in horror was Lovecraft, especially, again, like I said, young people. And I think that a lot of people that don't even know it, I've read stories and novels, are influenced by Lovecraft by measures through other people. It's kind of like, you've had all these these marriages over the years, and then somebody comes out with a unique eye color, but they don't know who they got it from. They don't know which relative they got that from, how far back that goes. And I think that Lovecraft definitely did that. He gave us all a lot to write about.
Yeah, for sure. And you have to be able to separate the art from the artist.
I think that's true. I think some living writers like that, I don't separate, because they're profiting from something. And even if they're good at it, I don't care. But when they die, I can celebrate it a little better because they're no longer profiting from it, even if their relatives are something that's immaterial to me. But like Roman Polanski, I won't watch any of his films. I think, and before that, his Rosemary's Baby, Chinatown are two of my favorite films of all time. But I won't watch anything he does because, he raped a 13-year-old girl, and he wasn't just accused of it; it was proved. And on top of that, he's a escaped felon. And so I feel differently in that respect. Just because somebody is thought to have done this or that, you can't really go wild and make decisions on something that's not proven. In him, it was easily proven. And I just don't want to help him profit by going to see any of his films or anything like that. But that said, Chinatown and Rosemary's Baby are my favorite. If he dies before me, I can go back and like those better even.
There you go.
But I do like those. I mean, I love those films, and that doesn't change. But it just means I don't want to support a child molester. And some people say, well, she forgave him. That has nothing to do with it.
No, that's it's
crime that was committed.
It's how you feel about it.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, and the thing, the crime was still committed. He's still guilty of the crime, no matter what. So I have those provisos. I just wanted to throw that in since you brought it up.
Yeah. No, I'm glad you did. Because it's true. If they're still living, F them. Yeah. When they die, then we can separate the art from the art.
Exactly.
I want to introduce one film that I'm going to tiptoe into some cheats here, but I thought Hellboy actually did a great job with the Lovecraft mythos.
You were right. Yeah,
Del Toro loves him.
Yeah, Mike's a friend of mine, and I remember when he was first starting out and doing those things, and it makes me so happy to see the success that he's had off of that with his unique storytelling and art style. But definitely, and the films, they have really leaned into that, and I think that's wonderful. And some of the characters in the film almost look like Lovecraftian creations.
Yes,
So I agree with you on that. Yeah.
Yeah, he really he did a fantastic job in the film as well. The first film, I just think the only film that I've really watched that truly captured the dreadful aspect of the elder gods and just the stupidity of trying to break through that dimension. And of course it never ends well, but I mean, I thought they really nailed it. So I do appreciate Mike Mignola for what he did there.
Yeah.
I'm curious to see what the new generation of filmmakers, what direction they're going to head with Lovecraft, because I do feel like it's such fertile ground. We've had adaptations previously. And I feel like we're going to get into a moment in the near future. I think the substance is going to be a catalyst. I think we're, all of a sudden little light bulbs are going off in screenwriters' heads and directors' heads, and they're like, all right, there's something there. So it's interesting to see what the future holds. But I think we can all agree nothing has been definitive. We don't have that one movie where we're like, this is it, we've got it.
Yeah, there's a famous director's name I can't think of right now. He did The Shape of Water.
Guillermo del Toro.
Guillermo del Toro. Yeah,
he had a TV sort of a Halloween anthology, and in that there's at least I think a couple of Lovecraft stories that were done, and those are pretty.
Yeah,
good.
Pickman's Model. I think.
Yeah, Pickman's Model's in there.
Mm-hmm. Those were pretty good, and they did that on
Netflix, I think.
No, yeah, but I was trying to think of Night. The Rod Serling. They did Pickman's Models too.
A Night Gallery.
Yeah, and they did a version of it there many years ago. It was a Night Gallery.
It's such a great story. I mean, it's a fantastic story.
Yeah.
That is it the Cabinet of Curiosities? Is that what it's called?
Mm-hmm.
Matt?
Yeah.
The production value on those stories
is great.
It's incredible.
They have one of the Henry Kuttner's one of my favorite writers, and they have one of his early stories, The Graveyard Rats.
Oh yeah,
oh yeah,
that's a fun one.
Oh, yeah.
And John, you asked, what's the future generation of filmmakers doing with Lovecraft? If I may be so bold as to plug some,
of course.
So there's two, Matt DeVino and David Yohe, who did a film that came out earlier this year called The Daemon. This is the most Lovecraft movie that has come out and it feels so much like a Lovecraft story. It's very small, intimate. The only difference is the characters are developed, right? And that's kind of the big, that's why I think that's the part that we're seeing now is we're seeing people applying the framework of Lovecraft to good storytelling. So in this case, you have, a guy who's basically his family has this little beach house that they are obsessed with the sea. They just cannot look away from it, whatever's in it. And the father dies, the son has to go back, and it causes all these people in the son's life to go find him. And you just start to see how it leans so much into Lovecraft. By the end, if you're a Lovecraft fan, you're just going to be grinning from ear to ear because they really did it. They showed like the things that he never describes in a way that feels pleasing and palatable. So I have to plug that one because I think that is this kind of recognition that just because there are some things that didn't work about the writing or the person, we can take what did and start to fill in those gaps accordingly. That movie is called
The Daemon?
Yeah, Daemon.
Okay.
So it'll be, he doesn't have wider distribution yet, but it should pretty soon. I'd say in the next year, be on the lookout for it. But that's what I'm excited about is we have people that are taking the ideas and running with them in ways that feel fresh, new, but also pay good homage back to Lovecraft.
No matter what I feel about the prose, his prose, he perseveres. And I really believe that's the ideas and the concepts. Because once you get those in your head, you can't hardly let them go. You just stick with you.
Joe, this episode is going to drop before Halloween. Okay. So I would kick myself if I didn't ask you, spooky season, we've got Halloween coming up. Please recommend one of your works for our listeners that they've got to read during this spooky time.
Oh, okay. I think if it's I think it's about to go back in print. I think it's available in other forms as the Night Runners.
Oh, it's so good. It's so good.
That's a good one if you're looking for a full length work. Yeah.
I mean, that was the second work that I read from you, and like I said before, two hands just come out of the pages and throttle you. It's so good. Yeah. It's so visceral.
That would be my darkest novel, I think. And
it's dark.
It's but I think, and it takes place on Halloween. The last part of it does anyway. So
it's fantastic. It's fantastic. I can't thank you enough for coming on, Joe. This is like a bucket moment for me because you're one of my favorite authors.
Thank you.
And you're also one of my favorite interviews. I listen to you whenever I can. I just love hearing you talk, and your stories are fantastic. So I'm floating that you came on.
Well, thank you guys. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, we're just thrilled to have you. Hopefully you'll thrill us and come back on again one day. Yeah. The only thing I'll ask both of you is if you could I'm going to hit stop now, but if you could both hang out for a second so I make sure I capture the feed. So from Sean O'Connor and Matt Orozco, Joe, we thank you so much for coming on. And yeah, please come back again someday, would you?
Yeah, I will. Thank you for having me.
All right.
Hey there. You just finished the latest episode of Blood, Guts, and Paper Cuts. That's fantastic. Thank you so much. We honestly do this for you, and we appreciate your time. I hope we entertained you. If we did, can we ask a huge favor? Would you be kind enough to go to iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, rate and review us? It's how we get our tiny little horror name out there and get our silly face in front of everyone and our silly little voices in everyone's ears. But we do it from a place of love, and we would really appreciate your support in doing this. You can follow us also on YouTube at Blood, Guts, and Paper Cuts Podcast, and on Instagram and Threads and Blue Sky. And you can find us there at SeanOC32. That's at SeanOC32. We really appreciate your time. Like I said, I hope you were entertained. Can't wait to see you back here in a day or two. Take care.